Welcome to In the Workshop. This one is called Repairing an Old Generator and Making it Work. I bought this old generator via eBay and it wasn't very expensive, it cost £51. And the seller stated that it may not work because it's very old and it didn't look very good, but I thought, well, I'll risk it for £51 because if all else fails, I can replace the innards with a modern electric motor. A modern electric motor with neodymium magnets in it would generate electricity quite well. But first of all, before doing anything drastic, I thought I would have a look at the mechanical condition of the generator itself. So I removed the drive pulley from the generator's shaft and connected my electric drill to it. And it doesn't generate any electricity, it is a non-generator. I tried reversing the drill so the generator ran in the opposite direction, but still nothing. The needle on the test meter just refused to move. I switched the test meter into impedance mode. And in this mode, I'm using the meter to test the continuity of the windings on the generator. And everything seems okay. So don't forget that I haven't played with the generator before, only a Hammond organ tone wheel generator, which is entirely different. So I really am out of my comfort zone with this gadget. I think it's time to take the generator apart and have a close look at it. If the bearings are shot or anything else is mechanically wrong with it, then I will go with plan A, which is to strip out all of the parts and fit a modern electric motor inside the existing case, and that will generate electricity quite well, I would think. I really don't know what to expect, and I don't know the running order for dismantling one of these things, but it seems like a good idea to undo any screws and take some things off it. And in this clip I'm removing the rear cover plate, although it does need a screwdriver to help it along on its way. Well, everything looks okay in there. There's a bolt in the end of the shaft, and this is a left-hand thread, so I'm undoing it by turning the bolt in the opposite direction to the way that you would normally unscrew a bolt. And with this bolt undone, it's very easy to withdraw the commutator complete with the front bearing. You will notice that in the front housing, one of the bolts is still in position. I cannot get this out, it's stuck in there. I'll look at that shortly. What I'm doing currently is removing the cover from the front bearing. This is just a push fit on the boss, and I'm using a screwdriver to carefully lever it off, but I'm finding it very difficult because this bolt is in the way. By using a couple of lock nuts to secure the shaft, I can remove the end part, and now it's much easier to get my screwdriver in and remove this front cover, and after much gentle prising with the screwdriver, it finally came loose. The first thing I noticed was that the commutator was in a bit of a state. It was very badly scored indeed. So I thought I would take this opportunity of having the commutator free and not in the generator to just skim the face of the commutator. This material is copper, and it is essential that you have a very sharp lathe tool in the lathe and only take very fine cuts. What I don't want to do is burr over the metal too much in between the commutator slots, hence the need for a very sharp lathe tool. After 3 of these cuts, the commutator started looking okay. There was no evidence of any damage from the brushes over the years. Once I'd cleaned up the face of the commutator, I cleaned it up somewhat further with some wet-to-dry sandpaper. This is 400 grit. And then I used some Scotch-Brite to get a really fine finish on this copper part. And once I got a good finish on the commutator, it was time to use a sharp knife, but use it backwards. So it's the back of the knife that is scraping the slots, just to get rid of any metal burrs or any carbon that is stuck in the slots. These need to be clear. You have to be very careful when doing this to make sure that the knife doesn't slip out of the slot and score the copper parts that you've just machined. Otherwise, you'll have to go back to square one. This video is going to be wide open for expert criticism, and I really don't mind on this one because I can't add anything. I'm just going to fix this thing. However I do it, it's going to work. The best clue I've had so far as to why this generator is not actually generating is the output wire. At first I thought that this was just one wire and the ground was the main chassis of the generator, but this is not so. When I look at the wire closely, there are clearly 2 cores in there, and they're insulated, or they used to be. The internal rubber insulation is well and truly shot. So I'm going to remove the stator coil entirely and have a close look at what's going on. To make sure that the stator coil goes back in the correct way round, I put a black spot on the coil. And in these clips you can clearly see the state of the wiring. It's not good. The main wiring to the stator coils, and actually the wiring of the stator and the armature, is very, very good. And there's something puzzling me about this generator entirely. In one of the gaps between the iron parts of the armature, there's a small label. It's handwritten and it's shellacked in. It's not something that's been stuck on afterwards. This was put on when the generator was being built. And it's dated. It says 18th of the 4th, 28. I'm assuming this is a 2 and not a 3. I cannot see the bottom of the 2 to verify this, but anyway, it's either 1928 or 1938. And if anyone knows exactly what this thing is and where it came from and what it was originally fitted to, etc., etc., please inform me. I would be very grateful, but don't send any links. I do not let links through on the channel. I've been chopping out the old wiring, and you notice that on one of the wires I tied a knot in it. That's to tell me that that one is the positive, and the one without the knot in it is the negative. And I'm very keen to keep this as it was, so I'm going to thread the wiring in exactly the same way as it was before I took it out. So all I have to do now is just solder a red wire and a black wire to the stator coil. And here they are in exactly the same place as the old wiring. I did film the soldering operation, but my hand was in the way most of the time, so I just didn't bother showing you that. But the good news is there aren't any dry joints and both the connections are sound. In this clip I'm fitting the stator coil back into the casing, and it's a really tight fit. In the end I tapped it into position using a soft hammer on the studs, and you will notice that both of the studs have a threaded collar halfway down them that holds the stator in place. By tapping them into place I could engage the threads, then I tightened them up, followed by removing the lock nuts that I fitted earlier. I didn't really want to use a rubber grommet and just have two wires coming out like this, so instead I sleeved the wires with some neoprene tubing, and I'm holding this in place using a cable tie. And I like this effect because it makes it look much more industrial and workmanlike. Once everything was back together and tightened, the first thing I did was connect a battery to the generator, which makes it into an electric motor, and thankfully it revolved. Then it was time to connect my electric drill to the shaft and spin the shaft, and as you can see it's generating okay. Not quite 12 volts, but it's generating, which is more than it did. So basically I know that it's okay. The bearings are in good condition, which is a real surprise. I don't think they make bearings like that anymore. I must say I'm very impressed with the quality of this as a machine. In each end it has a double ball race, which is pretty good really. What I'm doing currently is removing the paint. I'm using a combination of a cloth with some cellulose thinners or lacquer thinner, and also using some Scotch-Brite. The paint's coming away quite easily. I dismantled the generator for a second time because now I know there's nothing wrong with it and it works okay. I just wanted to give it a bit of a service, repack the bearings, etc., etc., pack the covers and tap them in place. Here I'm using a socket to tap the front one in place. You will notice that I'm only tapping this very gently, lots of small taps rather than few larger ones, and this seats the cover perfectly in place. The rear cover is held in position by 3 bolts. These are 6BA bolts, and I was tempted to replace them with brass ones, and I may do that after I've painted the generator. Or did I not mention I'm going to paint it? There will be a painting sequence, but I will call it painting the generator as a separate feature. Time now for a final test. And the good news is, all by itself the voltage has increased. It's now giving a full 12 volts output. So things are just bedding in nicely on the commutator, I would think. You may be thinking, why have I bought a generator? I normally repair and fix steam engines and associated bits and pieces. I bought a generator because lots of viewers have said it would be good to see a steam engine actually doing some work and driving something. So I'm going to put this generator on a separate baseboard. And all I need to do then is put the baseboard close to a steam engine, and I'll be able to generate my own electricity in the workshop. Besides, I've really enjoyed resurrecting this generator and bringing it back from the dead, and now let there be light. And I've learnt something that I didn't know. I notice on traction engines they always have like a big power switch like on a Frankenstein film, and that must be because you need to get the generator up to speed first before you put the load on it. If you put the load on it first, it doesn't work. It's witchcraft and electricity all rolled into one. I remachined the pulley because it was a bit of a mess, and now I'm refitting it to the generator, Ready to take a leather belt to generate some electricity. That's after I paint it, of course. But for the moment, that's it. Thanks for watching, and I hope you found it useful.